Hi guys. Um, Thank you all for joining me tonight. I yeah, I feel a little like I guess a little frustrated, just as you always are when you get stuck on puzzles in games. Like that's just a thing. That's pretty low grade. I'm feeling kind of like exhausted. I feel like this game wore me down a little bit tonight, which is fine. Like sometimes that happens, but it's interesting. It's interesting how I think it's a combination of this game being an intellectual exercise in a way that certainly some of the other games that we've played haven't been, and maybe none of the games that we've played have quite been. And then the format that I'm trying out, where I sort of address some pertinent general game related questions, is also kind of intellectually exhausting. But I think it's fun. Like I think it adds something interesting to each segment. I'd love to know, now that I've done it a couple times, what you guys think, and if you also feel like it adds something to the show. Yes. Also, I will work on getting all of these videos up on YouTube for anybody who hasn't seen the whole thing. But I am going to jump into questions right now. So, question number one. Curious, Sean, do you consider the use of music, sound, etc. when talking about game design? Not in this game specifically, but sometimes music in games can really add to the game's design style. 100%. I absolutely, completely agree with that. And in fact, I think the very first segment in this game, we addressed some questions of, what is the aesthetic of the game? What is the style? We talked a lot about the visual style. We didn't really talk about the auditory style. I think that's largely because audio is not my strong suit. And so it's something that I really have to focus a lot more on to be able to, speak intelligently about. I couldn't tell you what the audio in this game is like, honestly. Like, I don't have a strong sensory memory of it, and I didn't have sort of an experiential analysis of it while I was playing. It's just because sound is not like where my brain lives. But I do 100% agree. Music and sound are both incredibly important in sculpting the experience that you have when you play a game, in the same way that they're important when you watch a movie. The sound of a movie can affect you substantially, like fundamentally. It can change the way that you interpret the things that you see, and in a game it can change the way that you interpret the things that you do. So I feel like we talked a lot about the sort of the dramatic elements. So I struggled last week to sort of on this question of dramatic and dynamic elements and all of that. Music, sound, visual presentation, those things I would all lump under the dramatic elements of a game. Not the underlying mechanics, but how those mechanics are packaged and presented. That is, all of those things fall under that category. And the dramatic elements of a game are absolutely fundamentally important in the final experience of it. So once those videos go up on YouTube, there's a little bit more discussion there. And it's something that I think we've talked about in previous games as well. Again, like I'm very focused on like the visual design in terms of dramatic elements, but music and sound have a huge impact, and so I try not to ignore those. Okay. Can you talk about the way the game encourages efficient solutions? This is a great question. Can you talk about the way the game encourages efficient solutions? It seems like with the glyphs, which could be manually translated given time and gumption, to often give the option to solve things longhand. By this point, we're pretty confident in our ability to hack a better solution, though. Does that connect with an approach to programming? And if so, how? And how intentional do you think it is? This is a fantastic observation. It's something that I really hadn't thought about, but I think it's exactly on point. And the other example of it that came up last week that I will point to is in fighting the sort of first boss battle, where I had to get a turtle to run into, I forget what the boss was, but it was some kind of a giant thing with a shell. I had to get the turtle to run into it and explode on impact, which involved hacking into the turtle and turning its explode value to true, and then kiting it over to the boss and making it explode. It was pointed out that I probably could have just changed its faction from bad to good, and then I wouldn't have had to kite it. It would have just gone and attacked the enemy and exploded on impact, and that would have solved that puzzle really, really easily, which is great. I love that. I that is a fantastic solution that I just completely missed. The one thing that I would say is a little problematic about that is that the game didn't give me any feedback to suggest that there was a better solution than the one that I did. I mean, I absolutely think that it presented a scenario where there was an easy solution and a hard solution, and the easy solution is much easier. I definitely would have felt rewarded to have figured out and done the easy solution, but because I didn't figure that out, I'm actually left a little bit in the dark. I don't realize that I missed something. I don't realize that the game permits, and through permitting incentivizes me to figure out, as you say, ways to hack past the longhand solution. Shortcuts, efficiency shortcuts that I think the game fundamentally does incentivize. The second part of that question, which is about how intentional is this, and how does it relate to the idea of programming, that feels like a leading question, because it's definitely 100%. That's very related to the idea of programming. In fact, there are lots of different ways to approach programming and to try to get people interested in the theory of programming into computer science. One of the ways that resonates best for me, and that I've worked on different sort of ways to try to introduce people to programming, is the idea that programming is an efficiency multiplier. It's an action multiplier. It allows you, if you can understand how to digest certain tasks, to do those tasks much, much faster and more efficiently than you could do them by hand. And so for me, this is a lot of I do image processing tasks, or I do spreadsheet related tasks. These are tasks that are related to my work often, which happens to be in game design, but these tasks aren't necessarily especially related to game design, or they're not limited in their scope to game design. And as a programmer, I often find myself looking for ways to automate the tasks that I have to do. And I've gotten really familiar with like the variable system in Photoshop. I don't know if anyone has ever played with that, or with the scripting language that you can use in Excel or in Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets. I use those things all the time, and I use them to automate all sorts of different tasks because it ups my efficiency crazy amounts, and I love that. I get a high off of that. That kind of search for efficiencies is something that is, very, very related to the process of any kind of programming. When you do any kind of a coding project, like a game design project, a lot of what you're doing is looking for efficiencies, trying to find like what is the effect that you're trying to have, what is the net experience that you want the user to have, and then what is the simplest way, both from an upfront cost standpoint, like what is the simplest thing for me to program, and then also from a ongoing processing costs, like what is the simplest thing to run, what is the least logic, what is the least complicated actual program that I can put together that will accomplish the experience that I want it to accomplish. That's a fundamental part of programming, and so I think this game is doing a really good job, even though it's not directly relating that idea of searching for efficiencies to programming. I think part of what it's doing, like we talked about this earlier, so far it hasn't taught me anything about programming. The closest that it's done is sort of like it's introducing me to basic fundamental concepts of cryptography. But instead of teaching me like about how to program or what programming is or like any of that stuff, it's getting me into the mindset that is, sympathetic to the mindset of a programmer. Thinking about things in terms of their behaviors and the variables that control them, thinking about the underlying models that actually produce the visuals, the artifact that we see and experience, thinking about how things work, like combination locks, like that key code lock, like thinking about I didn't talk about it at all, and I don't know how much of it comes across, but the puzzle where you need to reset the registration point on the sprite sheet for the font, because that is literally what you're doing. In that puzzle where like all of the letters are scrambled up and we had to like fix it, literally what we're doing is there is a sprite sheet that contains all of the letters and determines how letters are displayed in dialogue or in certain places in dialogue, and we were sort of changing offsets on like how those letters were displayed, and by manipulating that, you got a sense of what the sprite sheet looks like for that font, and I don't know, I think like that kind of thing is really cool. That's not teaching me how to program, but it is teaching me to think about these underlying ideas and the processes and the kinds of things that you need to think about as a programmer. And one of those is, searching for efficiencies. How would you compare the feeling of puzzle solving in this game to the feeling of puzzle solving in Antechamber? Okay, so I have no idea how to answer this question, but this is it's great to draw that kind of connection between a couple of very different games that we've played that obviously have some fundamental thematic connections in terms of, they're both puzzle games. They're both games that are about solving puzzles, and they're both games that are about sort of manipulating the world in unexpected ways, in ways that defy your traditional expectations of how the world will work in order to solve those puzzles. I mean, immediately the first thing that I think is that, like, just on a high level, Antechamber, all of the puzzles in Antechamber are very sort of spatially focused. They're focused on breaking down your expectations of physics. That's how I would describe that, I guess. Really distorting or subverting what your understanding of 3D space is. And establishing some patterns, but sort of creating like a fictional universe in which physics works differently, and then sort of, creating puzzles around that. One of the things that's different for me, and maybe this is extremely subjective, but in hack and slash, first of all, I feel like the world that I am learning how to interact with in order to solve these puzzles isn't a fictional world. It's not a alternate reality where physics works differently. It's there's something more authentic about it. There's something fundamentally real about the things that I'm doing in hack and slash, because it's actually manipulating the underlying structure of the game. It's about how the game actually works rather than sort of exploiting tricks of Antechamber is all about sort of exploiting the optical illusions, I guess, that are inherent in how we project 3D worlds on a computer screen. And this is a game that's about sort of taking, the 2D worlds that we project on a computer screen and actually stripping away some of the the covering of it and showing what's underneath. Whereas I would say it feels like Antechamber is not about sort of gaining a fundamental understanding of how these things actually work. It's about creating, through additional illusions, a completely different way that things could work, and then trying to teach you that. That doesn't feel like a satisfying answer. Sorry. I'm going to think about these two experiences, and maybe I'll have more of an answer to that question later. I've literally not thought about the connections between Antechamber and hack and slash until now. I think that's a really interesting connection to make. What do you think of the design of the items? They all perform a specific function, and yet most of them are just thingamabobs that don't visually tell you very much about what they do. Is programming too abstract to be represented as real-life objects? feel like this is maybe two separate questions, because I would say, for example, I love the design of the USB sword. I love everything about that. I love the way that it's taking, what is a fundamentally familiar action adventure item and twisting it, changing it, maybe not subtly, but changing it in a way that doesn't completely transform it, but does sort of make it into something new that behaves differently and behaves in an understandable way and connects to the rest of the world. Like, now I know that every time I see something that has a USB slot, like, I can use that sword on it. I love that item dearly. I think that's really super cool. It's the only one that I feel that way about. Like the invisibility hat is pretty neat, and I like that I have to hold it on my head, which gives me a sort of narrative justification for the reason that I can't use any other items while I have it on. But other than that, I literally think about all of the other items as thingamabobs. They're just little things, and some of them even look exactly the same, which is like super weird. The boomerang is like a long range USB sword, but it just looks like a boomerang, which is weird. Like, I find that really strange. So I'm not crazy about the design of the items except for that sword, which I think is fantastic, amazing. And then the second question is programming too abstract to be represented as real life objects? I don't know. That's tricky. I mean, but like, why could the time distortion, whatever thing, why couldn't that be a clock? Why couldn't that be represented as, a stopwatch or something like that along those lines? What else do we have? We've got the boomerang. I guess the boomerang can get deflected by things. I'm a little disappointed that we got a boomerang instead of a hook shot, because I could 100% see shooting out a USB stick on a hook shot. Like, I think that really works in my head. Like, that models really well. Whereas the boomerang, I don't understand at all what that's about. Like, why? Like, how does that allow us to hack into anything? How is it even visually related to the USB stick? I'm much more confused by that. The overlay, couldn't that have been represented by glasses or a magnifying glass or something like I do feel like there's a way, and none of these things are there's still an abstraction to it, right? None of these things are gonna speak mechanically, I guess, to what they actually do. There's no reason why do I have a sword that allows me to reprogram the variables in things? What does that even mean? Why do I even have a USB stick that allows me to change the variables and things? That doesn't make perfect sense. There's not a direct connection. There's still a significant layer of abstraction, but I feel like those items could have been designed in a way that there was at least some sort of narrative resonance between the item and the functionality of it, even if there still has to be quite a bit of abstraction from the actual programming to the visual representation of that programming, which I don't know that I have a good answer to whether or not it's possible, like that's literally necessary if programming is just so abstract that has to be that way. I kind of suspect that that's probably true. Certainly that is a very hard problem to visualize, like programming. But I think you could at least pay lip service to it. You could at least help me understand the sort of the place of each of these objects conceptually within the world of programming. Okay, and then the last question here, dragon question. So would this game be better if it had dragons in it? I actually, like, I'm not writing dragons off yet. The thing with the laser beams and the wavelengths kind of looked like a big stone dragon. Like, I don't know if that counts. The dragon question is hard for this one, I think, because like I could interpret that as a dragon would be essentially a boss that I would fight. I like how would the game be better with dragons in it question has evolved in my mind into, like, how would you put dragons into this game? Like, where would the dragons go? So dragon could be like a boss fight where I have to do something clever in order to defeat the dragon, and I feel like that territory is already covered, right? Like, we saw a boss. I expect that there will be more boss fights later, and the boss fights are going to be sort of like, testing. They're going to be trials by which we have to put into practice the things that we've learned in, like, the previous section. A dragon could also be a particular type of thing, like a creature that we interact with. Which could be cool, but it's not. I don't have a great idea. Like, it doesn't jump out at me as to what the dragon would do, what would differentiate it from other creatures in the game. So we've got a creature that, like, we just hack variables from, right? The turtles are all about just, like, your ability to manipulate their behavior through variables. The guards are all about your the importance or your ability to sort of understand the underlying model and squeeze around it, right? To see what their vision cone is and get around their vision cone. Now, I guess, so there's two things. One is, like, I know there is a whole third act. There's a whole mechanic that we haven't touched yet that's all about programming. So I could imagine, like, we could bring dragons in for that, but I'm sure that there will be some other mechanism that is designed to, fully explore that code writing section. So I guess then the thing that I'm seeing it's not clear that it's being fully explored is this sort of, like, code breaking cryptography thing. I think it'd be fun to include a section of the game where there was a dragon who would, like, ask you riddles or like tell you things that you need to know, like tell you in a kind of oh god, what was the brilliant Phantom Hourglass, the Zelda game that was all about information as resource. So there's a dragon, you go up to talk to the dragon will tell you, like, which of the 3 chests you should open because the other ones contain bombs and one of them contains hearts or whatever. But he tells you in, like, a Caesar cipher, a Caesarian cipher, or a Vignere cipher, or, like, some kind of simple ciphered language that then you have to decipher. And ideally, now we would introduce sort of a new mechanic that allows you to actually process language to manipulate strings in very simple ways. So you would talk to the dragon, and he would give you some like indecipherable series of letters, and then you would go to your like code breaking machine where you could feed in that series of letters and then set up like how it is going to manipulate those letters. So you could say, like, for a very simple what is this, Caesarean cipher, where you've just got like an offset, like every time there's an A it becomes a B, and every time there's a B it becomes a C, and now all of a sudden your whole message is garbled because everything's off by one. You feed that message into a machine and say subtract 1 from every letter, and the message that comes out the other end is completely readable. And so you could do something, I think, really cool with things like statistical analysis and these really simple ciphers, and also this idea of automation, and how it's a huge pain in the ass to go through and decipher glyph by glyph what is this message saying. But if you have a machine that you can program to say, try adding a value to every letter and see what the result is, then you can go through it like really quick. And in fact, like, you can solve every Caesarean cipher in 26 rounds if you just add 1 to every letter, add 2 to every letter, add 3 to every letter. The most that you would have to do is do that 26 times, and you would get the correct message. And so if you set that up so that it was actually like reasonable to do that, I think you could have a really cool little code breaking section of this game that would be thematically fitting. But I don't think, and even we're getting into some of this like computer security, cryptography, code breaking sorts of things. At a foundational level, this could be a way to explore that a little bit further, while without getting like too terribly complicated. I think you could do it without getting too terribly complicated. And actually, the complicated part of this is the machine that you use to like process language. So maybe that's what the dragon does. Maybe you find these codes and you give them to the dragon, and the dragon is really good at string manipulation for whatever reason, because that's what dragons are good at. And so you can give, high-level basic instructions to the dragon, and the dragon can, very easily crack a Caesarean cipher or something like that. Okay, that's my dragon answer. Thanks, guys. I'm going to come back next week. I'm going to play more of this game. Help me think about what it is I'm supposed to do next, because I'm stuck, and I might still be stuck next time. I might need help from you, you brilliant chat people who will help me out. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I can't wait. Don't forget to monitor Twitter, I guess, for the various things that are happening in the community. We're very close to launching a new community website, I believe, which I'm really excited about, and just haven't been able to help the mods who have been doing all of the work sort of get it the final mile. But I think that's going to be really exciting, and will help us sort of organize and keep track and keep updated on all of the various community events that go on throughout the week, including Sunday Game Club with Thanarod, Cage Tigers stream, which I think is on Saturdays at 7. Bill and Maria, streaming with Bill and Maria. the Feedback Force podcast, which is currently doing Long Live the Queen, which is a game that I'm seriously eager to play. I'm not gonna manage to play it for this episode of the podcast, but I think that I will play it on stream at some point in the future, and so I highly encourage you to check out the last Feedback Force podcast, play Long Live the Queen, listen to the next Feedback Force podcast where they discuss it in detail, and then you guys will all be so much smarter than me when I eventually play Long Live the Queen, and you can tell me all of the stuff that I'm doing wrong. It's going to be great. Am I forgetting other things? There's so much now. I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. Anyway, the play-by-play community is just really exciting. It's gotten to the point where I can hardly keep track of it anymore, and I love that. I love that people are doing stuff and finding their own passions in games and connecting with one another. So keep it up, guys. Like that's really, really awesome. All right, I am going to I'm gonna go. I'm gonna sign off. Thanks for joining me this week. Looking forward to seeing you again next week, and yeah, have a great time in between now and then. Play some games. I'll see you later.